My family mocked me at dinner, then begged for money. But I unmasked my sister's fraud and walked away with my name cleared. At the family reunion, my dad announced, "I'd rather eat garbage than talk to you again." Sister laughed. Mom tried to stop him, but I said enough and left. It's funny, because he didn't know that in 1 month later he would come begging me. It started with one of those text messages you stare at for 10 minutes before deciding whether to reply. "Just a line from my mom, please come to family dinner, it's important." I didn't reply. Then she called. The first time I let it ring. The second time I answered. She didn't beg, not exactly. But her voice had that soft edge she only used when she hoped I'd do something I clearly didn't want to. She said everyone would be there. That they wanted to talk. That it was time. I said, "You mean it's time for me to apologize again for something I didn't do?" She didn't argue. She just became quiet for a moment and said, "Do it for me, not for them." And maybe that's the only reason I agreed. I booked the table myself. A private room, 10 seats, candlelight, a view of the river, and a menu that must have made the chef cry when people asked for ketchup. I wanted it to be nice, not because I wanted them to feel special, but because if I was going to play along with this charade, I wanted to be in control. I also knew they wouldn't expect it. They'd think we'd meet at some chain near the motorway. They'd hate the idea that I was the one who had organized something better than they'd ever done themselves. They arrived 20 minutes late. My sister Madison had a coat draped over her shoulders like she was walking a red carpet, sunglasses inside. Dad wore a sports coat like he was somebody. Mom followed, smiling too wide, her eyes darting back and forth as if scanning for threats. I was already seated, drinking a glass of wine I didn't even like. They sat down. I nodded. My mom tried to break the ice with something about how nice the restaurant was. Madison rolled her eyes. My dad didn't say anything at first. He just stared at me, then laughed. Then, without even waiting for the waiter to leave, he said it. "I'd rather eat rubbish than talk to you again." Then Madison actually burst out laughing hard, cackling in her seat as if she'd heard the best joke of the year. She looked at the server who had frozen halfway through pouring water and said, "Did you hear that?" He finally said something true. Mom reached across the table to stop her, but she kept going. She started calling me a loser. She said I had this pathetic habit of always crawling back, always trying to hold the family together like some sad little blue stick. She said that everyone should feel sorry for me, that I had booked all this fancy dinner just to make myself feel important for once. And then she clapped in the middle of the room, mocking applause. That was it. I looked at my mom, who looked like she was going to cry, and I just said no. I got up, left my jacket on the chair, and walked out without a word to either of them. Not even a look back. I thought that was the end of it. But then, less than 1 week later, I started getting strange emails. Not from them, never from them. From someone else, a name I didn't recognize. And there were documents attached, financial records, screenshots, things I wasn't supposed to see. At first, I thought it was spam. Then I saw the name of the company at the top of one of the PDFs, Madison's company. I didn't know it yet, but something very bad was about to happen to my sister. And in spite of everything, they were going to come running to me, and I was going to make them sorry they ever laughed at that table. The first email came on a Thursday evening. Subject line, "You'll want to see this." No text in the body, just an attachment and a sender. I didn't recognize some alias with a jumble of numbers in the address. I assumed it was junk, deleted it and went to bed. 2 days later, another email. Same sender, this time with 3 attachments. Still no message, just more PDFs, spreadsheets, and a JPEG that looked like a screenshot of a Slack conversation. Something about refunds, and someone called Ken, needing to be silenced. I still didn't click. But then came the third, and this time the subject line had a name I couldn't ignore. Mad Ventures internal file urgent. Madison's company. On pure instinct, I clicked. No viruses, no ransom notes, just files. Dozens of them. Financials. Transfer logs, emails between executives, someone highlighting discrepancies in employee payments, tens of thousands of dollars moved every few weeks to accounts with no names, just numbers. But one detail made my stomach turn. A scanned document bearing Madison's signature. It was under a memo that said, "Push these through before the end of the quarter. No need for legal to check." I scrolled on another file with an expense report sheet approved, listing consulting fees and cash payments to an entertainment company that didn't even have a website. This wasn't some minor miscalculation or accounting error. It looked like a front. It looked dirty, it looked federal. But I still didn't know what any of this had to do with me until the last email came. This one had a message, one line. "Your sister's going to need a friend soon. Thought you should see this before it all blows up. I didn't sleep that night." On Monday, I ignored 6 calls from my mother. I picked up the 7th, and she sounded out of breath. She said there'd been an accident. Madison was in hospital, something about fainting, heart problems, exhaustion. They weren't sure. They were keeping her for tests. I asked if she was okay. My mom said, "She's scared, Andrew. She keeps asking for you." That part took me by surprise. I almost said yes. I almost asked which hospital, but something stopped me. Then 2 hours later, I got a text from my dad. "We need to talk. It's urgent at your place." I stared at it for a while. I didn't answer, but 30 minutes later they came anyway. It was the first time my dad had been in my flat ever. He looked thinner, like someone had taken a straw and sucked the life out of him. My mom didn't say anything. She just kept fidgeting with her sleeves. I didn't invite her in. I stood in the doorway. My dad handed me a folder, plain manila, a little wrinkled, and said they needed my help. He said Madison was in trouble, real trouble. He used words like investigation and indictment. He said they'd frozen her accounts and seized her work laptop. And then he looked me dead in the eye and asked if I could loan them $80,000. I laughed. Couldn't help it. Just laughed right out the door. He flinched. I told him they had picked the wrong loser this time, the one who always apologized, the one who always booked the table, the one who was apparently such a pathetic joke that they couldn't even be polite to him for one night. My mom tried to intervene, said it wasn't like that they were scared, that Madison didn't know what she'd signed up for, that it was all happening too fast. I looked at them both standing there practically sweating with guilt and despair, and for a second I thought about saying yes, about stepping up. But then I remembered Madison clapping at that restaurant table like she was watching a school play. So I told them no. And then I told them that I already knew. My dad blinked. My mom's jaw clenched. I stepped back and shut the door. They didn't knock again. They didn't try to contact me again for 3 days. I figured they were either too embarrassed or too busy cleaning up the mess Madison had made. Either way was fine with me. I spent those days doing something I hadn't done in years, absolutely nothing. I didn't check my email. I didn't answer my phone. I went to the park near my flat, sat on a bench with coffee, and just existed. No drama, no family chaos. It was strangely peaceful until I turned on the television on Thursday morning. It was a local news bulletin, the kind that usually reports on the weather and petty crime. But then I saw it. Breaking allegations surfaced against Madco Venture Chief Executive Officer Madison Bell. I stared at the screen. A blurry image of Madison walking into a courthouse flanked by 2 men in suits, one of whom looked very much like a federal agent. The anchor mentioned words like fraud, embezzlement, and ongoing investigation. They said unnamed whistleblowers had provided financial evidence going back more than 3 years. They showed an enlarged image of a document with a signature that had already been circulating online, their signature. It was surreal to watch the world see what I'd already known. But what took me completely by surprise was the name they mentioned next. Mine. Sources close to the investigation say a family member of the accused recently received anonymous internal documents and may have been approached for financial support. I blinked. This wasn't supposed to be public. I hadn't said anything. I hadn't leaked anything, and I certainly hadn't spoken to anyone in the press. 10 minutes later, my phone exploded. Old colleagues, high school friends, even my landlord was texting me. "Hey, are you okay, man? Saw the news." Then came the call from the blocked number. I usually let them go to voicemail, but I picked it up. It was a reporter, some guy from a financial magazine. He said he had sources who said I might be involved in helping to expose the fraud at Madco. He asked if I'd be willing to comment. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about and hung up. But then something unexpected happened. 1 hour later, someone rang my doorbell. I didn't recognize the voice at first. He said his name was Eli and that he was the person who had sent me the emails. He said he didn't want anything, just to explain before things got worse. Against every instinct, I let him up. He was young, maybe mid-20s, wore a hoodie, trainers. Looked like he hadn't slept in 1 week. He sat on the edge of my couch, nervous but not threatening. He said he used to work at Madco, a mid-level finance guy, and had been sacked without warning when they found out he was asking too many questions. He hadn't just stumbled across the scam. He had evidence, backup drives, recordings, and even an entire email thread where Madison told someone to shut it down quietly or we're all going down. He had already talked to investigators. They were building a case, but he said something else that made my stomach turn. "Your name came up, man. Madison tried to pin it on you." I blinked. "What?" He nodded. "They found an old draft email where she tried to make some transfers under your name. She never sent it, but it was there, like just in case. So they hadn't just been laughing at me. Not only had they begged me for money after the fall, but Madison, my own sister, was apparently willing to use me as a scapegoat if it meant saving herself. I sat back, stunned. He said he thought I should know before it went to court, that summons had already been issued, that I might want a lawyer. When he left, I didn't say much, just thanked him. I closed the door. Then I opened my laptop and started going through every email, every file he had sent me. I forwarded it all to one person, a lawyer I hadn't spoken to since college, because suddenly I wasn't just the guy running away from a toxic family. I was a target. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was scared, but because I was angry. I kept thinking about that dinner, about Madison clapping while my dad acted like I wasn't even human. And now this. Now she was going to leave me holding the bag when it all fell apart. I passed everything on to Brian. Brian was a friend from law school. We hadn't spoken much since graduation. He'd gone big corporate law in a downtown high-rise while I'd gone into something quieter. But he always said if I ever needed a favor, just one, he'd be there. I decided to take him up on it. He called me back within a quarter of an hour. He didn't ask a lot of questions. Just said, "You're going to want to get in front of this. Come in tomorrow." When I walked into his office the next day, he had a file on me, 2 coffees and a whiteboard with half a timeline sketched out. That's when I realized something that should have scared me more than it did. He believed it. All of it. And not only that, he thought it was bad. I told him about the email drafts, about the guy called Eli, about my parents turning up asking for money, about Madison's plan to quietly shift the blame my way. He didn't flinch. He'd seen worse. Then he asked the question I wasn't prepared for. Do you want to protect yourself, or do you want to bury them? I hesitated. I said I didn't want anything bad to happen to my family. That in spite of everything, I didn't want to destroy them. I just didn't want to take the blame. I said I just wanted them out of my life and far away from my name. He looked at me and said, "Then we'll do both." Brian wrote a letter, a very formal, very cold letter. It was addressed to Madison's legal counsel, who we found out had already started contacting former employees, probably trying to keep things quiet. The letter made one thing very clear. If my name appeared anywhere in their defense, in court or in the media, we would take immediate legal action for defamation, obstruction, and damages. And Brian wasn't bluffing. He sent a letter that afternoon straight to the inbox of the managing partner of her firm. The next morning, their legal team called him. They were panicked. They denied everything. They said the email was a misunderstanding, that no one had ever intended to implicate me, that they were deeply sorry for any stress it had caused. Brian just said, "Make sure your client understands that very clearly." Then he smiled and added, "Because if she doesn't, he'll go public. Everything." They backed off hard and fast. But that wasn't the end of it, because a few days later, I got another message. Not from a reporter, not from my mom, not from anyone I was expecting. It was from Madison. Just one line, "Please meet me, just once. You don't have to say anything. Just let me explain." And I swear for a second I almost considered it. But then Brian called, and you know what he told me? That changed everything. I hadn't answered Madison's message. I let it sit in my inbox like a rotten piece of fruit. Every hour that passed, I expected her to follow up, to call, to threaten, to beg. But she didn't. Just that one message. She probably thought the silence meant I was thinking about it. Maybe I was. Then Brian called. He didn't waste any time. He just said, "You need to hear this." Apparently, one of his contacts, someone who owed him a favor, had got wind of a sealed motion that Madison's legal team was trying to push through. It wasn't public yet, but the short version, they were trying to cut a deal with the prosecutors. She'd cooperate, hand over names, documents, whatever they wanted in exchange for reduced charges. But here's the part that really hit me. One of the names on the list she was prepared to give up was mine. Not as a scapegoat this time, but as a CO conspirator. Someone who may have seen documents. Someone who may have received inside information and failed to report it. Someone who may have benefited financially. Brian was calm about it. I wasn't. I asked how the hell this made sense. I didn't work there. I didn't know anything until weeks ago. I didn't do anything. Brian said it didn't matter. What mattered was that their team was willing to try. If it stuck, even briefly, even just enough to raise questions, it would take years to shake it. Investigations, reputational damage, background checks, job prospects, travel. Everything I'd worked for could go up in smoke because Madison thought I was easy to throw under the bus. So, Brian sent another letter. This one wasn't friendly. He filed a preemptive declaration with the court, attached every email, every file Eli had sent, laid up the timeline to show I had no involvement, and just to add insult to injury, he included a formal request that Madison's team be barred from mentioning my name in any future proceedings, period. If they did, we'd sue for malicious prosecution. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "If they push it, we'll make it public." Every single file that must have got through, because 2 hours later he got a call from one of the partners in their legal team. They wanted to clarify that Madison had no intention of implicating me, that they were correcting the language, that the earlier motion was just a misunderstanding. Brian told them to put it in writing. They did. But here's where things get even messier. I got another message that night. Not from Madison, from Eli. It said, "There's something else. Something I haven't sent you yet. I wasn't sure if I should, but I think you need to see it now." It was a video file. Low quality, shaky, like it had been taken with a phone propped up on a desk. In the frame, Madison and my dad sitting in what looked like their office. She was crying, or trying to, talking about how things were getting out of hand, about how she couldn't go to prison, about how Andrew doesn't even know what's coming. If it falls on him, it ends there. My dad nodded. He said, "He'll be fine. He always does. He'll come through it. He always does." I must have said it 20 times. That was the moment I stopped thinking about family. After I saw that video, something changed inside me. It wasn't just betrayal. This was cold, calculated indifference. My father, the man who always told me I'd always be his son no matter what, was casually discussing throwing me under the bus as if it were no different from deciding what to have for dinner. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. I didn't tell Brian about the video right away. He was already dealing with the legal side of things, and I didn't need any more complications. What I needed was a strategy, one that would not only protect me, but make sure my father and sister understood that they couldn't get away with this. Not anymore. I spent the next few days in complete silence. I didn't answer my mom's calls. I didn't check my emails. I didn't go to work. I didn't leave my flat. I had everything I needed right in front of me. Brian's legal papers, Eli's data, and that damn video. I let it all marinate, thinking about every angle. And then I did something that neither Madison nor my father would ever expect. I called a press conference. I know it sounds dramatic, but hear me out. I put it all together in less than 48 hours. I contacted a small but well-known investigative reporter I'd met years ago. He wasn't part of the mainstream media circus, but he had a reputation for digging into corporate corruption and family drama. He was discreet, knew the kind of leverage I had, and was more than willing to help. He didn't ask any questions. He just told me to come to his office with the files. When I arrived, he had already set up a camera. I gave him everything, the emails, the files, the video, and I gave him a detailed factual account of the last few months, the fraud, the cover-ups, the lies. I was calm, methodical. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted the truth out there. I told him to report everything. Then the reporter asked the one thing I wasn't expecting. "Why are you taking this to the press now?" "What's your goal, Andrew?" I smiled. "To make sure my name is cleared and to make sure they can't do it again. I'm not the victim here. I'm the one they tried to bury, and I won't let that happen." The next morning, it made the news. Not as a small scandal. It was everywhere. The articles came fast. They published the full story, not just about Madison and the company's fraudulent dealings, but about the corruption within the family, about how Madison had tried to frame me for something I had never done, about how my father had been more than willing to let me take the fall while pretending to be the family patriarch. The effect was immediate. Madison's lawyers contacted me first, through Brian. Of course, they wanted to cut a deal. They claimed that the evidence against her was overwhelming and that a plea bargain was imminent. But that wasn't the surprising part. The surprise came when they asked if I would be willing to speak on their behalf, not as a co-conspirator, but as a supportive family member to show that I wasn't as involved as they thought. I laughed. It was almost too perfect, but I told them I'd only talk on one condition: full immunity. Full, unquestioning immunity for me and my reputation. If they wanted me to make a statement that would clear my name and save their skin, they'd have to admit everything. Their lawyers balked. But after one day of panic and desperate negotiations, they relented. The next day, I met Madison's team at her office. It was mostly a formality. I read the documents they handed me, signed the papers that ensured my name wouldn't be dragged through the mud again. They agreed to make a public statement that would officially clear me of any wrongdoing in connection with their business. And the final twist: my father didn't show up for any of it, not once. By the time the ink was dry on the settlement, the media frenzy had begun to die down. But there was one thing that caught my attention. As part of the deal, Madison's name was officially removed from the company's leadership. Its golden child status was gone. The company was in the process of being sold off to cover debts and lawsuits, and all her supposed friends were already looking for the next big thing to latch onto. It was the beginning of the end for them. But for me, I was free. I was out of that mess. No debts, no smear campaign. And the media, they stopped caring as soon as the story dried up. 2 weeks later, I got a final message from my mom: Madison is out. I'm so sorry, Andrew. I wish you could forgive us. I didn't reply because in that moment I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. Some families aren't worth saving, and some battles aren't won in courtrooms. They're won by taking control of your own story. As I sat in my quiet flat weeks after the dust had settled, staring at the last unread message from my mom, something inside me finally stilled. For years I had carried this quiet ache. The hope that if I just tried harder, apologized one more time, booked one more table, they would finally see me. Not as the family's punching bag, not as the reliable fool who always came crawling back, but as a person worthy of basic respect. I realize now that I had been clinging to a version of family that only existed in my head. That dinner, with Madison's mocking clap echoing in the private room and my father's cruel words hanging in the air, wasn't the moment they broke me. It was the moment I stopped breaking myself for them. When they showed up at my door begging for money, pale and desperate, I felt nothing close to triumph. Just a hollow confirmation of what I had always suspected. Their love was conditional, transactional, and fragile as glass. And when I learned they were willing to let me take the fall, Madison drafting emails in my name, my father nodding along as if sacrificing me was just another Tuesday, I didn't feel rage anymore. I felt released. The strangest part is the peace that came afterward. I expected bitterness to swallow me whole, but instead there was clarity. I had spent so long trying to glue together a family that never wanted to be whole. Letting go didn't feel like losing them. It felt like finding myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come or bracing for the next insult disguised as a joke. I was simply free. I don't hate them. Hate would mean they still have power over me. I just feel sorry for them in the way you feel sorry for strangers who've made irreversible choices. Madison will carry the weight of her consequences, legal, financial, social, for the rest of her life. My parents will live with the knowledge that they chose her ambition over their son, and I will live with the quiet certainty that I did the right thing. I protected my name, I protected my future, and I walked away before they could drag me down with them. Looking back, the hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing I had betrayed myself for years by staying. Walking away, with my name cleared and my conscience clean, wasn't revenge. It was self-respect. And no amount of money, no desperate plea, no tearful text from my mother will ever make me trade that for the illusion of family again. I'm okay now, truly okay. And that's something they can never take from me.